it's just the glorification of the old powers. You get to learn
Yeah.
lots about the British, the French, the Belgium, and
Why
other
should I know? Why
people.
should I know of Sir Gordon Gordonsburg?
Yeah,
They're so power hungry that if anybody is going to challenge that status quo, they can do anything to the person.
There is a new African in the world. The black man is capable of challenging the whole of us.
Welcome to the African Experience Podcast, your podcast for fascinating discussions, stories, and interviews from the diaspora. Your host, two ordinary Africans.
Hello, fellas. Welcome to episode 2 of the African Experience Podcast. I am Abdul Hafiz.
I am Yakubu Ali.
We are your hosts for the African Experience Podcast. First of all, we'd like to thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule. We know most of our listeners are students and workers and have their own jobs, but you've been able to take your time to listen to our podcast, and we like you know that we appreciate it a lot. Today we have something that is we're going to talk about something we think is one of the most integral part of our lives, something most people would agree that if done very well, it's going to be very powerful for the individual. And this something is education. Nelson Mandela put it best. He said, education is the most important weapon which you can use to change the world. Jakub, so what would you say, what would you tell us about your view on education?
I believe education always meant something different to different people at different times, and it has always been there to serve the human society. And as we all know, when we look at the primordial time, there are different forms of education, and at that time, I think the most important reason why people need to educate themselves was for survival. So when you compare their time and our time, it's kind of different when it comes to the understanding of what education means. During that time, people were educated on how to survive.
Yeah.
So by that, they have to learn how to make tools so that they can protect themselves.
Yeah.
And at a certain point too, they have to learn how to maintain and make sure make sure that their prosperity survives. So everything that they do is about survival. And when we look at our time too,
Yeah.
the survivor, the common denominator has always been survival. Even though as time goes on, we see that there are a lot of changes when it comes to what is meant by education.
Yeah.
And during our time, for instance, in this modern time, we see a lot of the standardization of education.
Yeah.
And most of the time too, I think we confuse education and schooling.
Yes, actually, I wanted to talk to you about that too. That's interesting.
Yes.
You've hit the nail actually on the spot.
Yes. And if we take education single-handedly, it can be anything as long as it's going to serve the needs of people at the particular time we talk about. So there are differences in terms of the meaning of education, but it has always been a very essential part of human survival and the human society. And
You've actually hit a very important spot. Sorry for our listeners, but I want to interject something. You know, in Turkish, when they
Yes.
say eğitim ve öğretim,
Yeah, we have two different things
yeah,
about
we
it.
have two different names for education per se,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
eğitim is the education, like training, and öğretim is like teaching. I think this is what most of the time we don't understand clear the clear difference.
Yes.
Yeah. So continue.
And there are two people like who talked about education. Most of the time when I hear the word education, they come to my mind. One of them is James Baldwin.
Can you say that again? I couldn't hear.
James Baldwin.
Great. Okay.
Yeah,
Baldwin.
and he said actually the paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated.
Yeah.
And that the
That's true.
purpose of education finally is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself or herself, to make his own decision, to say to himself, this is white or this is black,
Yeah.
to decide for himself whether there is a God in the heaven or not, to ask questions of the universe and then learn to live with those questions. Is the way he achieves his own identity. But no society is really anxious to have that kind of person around. What society really ideally wants is a citizen which will simply obey the rules of society. If a society succeeds in this, that society is about to perish. And that the obligation of anyone who thinks of himself as responsible is to examine society and try to change it and to fight it at no matter what risk. So you see, there are two things in here. People need to be educated to find themselves, to find their identity. But the irony is the society at a certain point also doesn't want those kind of people, because you are going to question your society and then
Yeah.
you kind of become a problem
Rebellion.
to the society. Yeah, you are becoming a rebellion or a rebel to your society. But education is something we cannot do without. The problem arises when we ask a much deeper question, like what kind of education?
What kind?
Then we get the disparities where people will be arguing the kind of education we give to a certain people at a certain location or geography, because we are different and we all need different things to survive. People who are living at the southern parts of the globe need something different to survive than the people who are living on the northern parts of the globe. So to educate people, or when we talk about education, to try to implement what the northern people need to the southern people, will like it will be a form of obstruction and distraction to their survival and their continuity. So,
actually, what you said right there is very important, because I think there's a saying of Einstein that he said, when you teach a fish how to climb a tree, I'm paraphrasing most probably, when
yes,
you teach a fish to climb a tree, he'll spend the rest of his life thinking he is stupid or something like that.
yeah,
So trying to bring the system of education of, say, the West or the northern, like as you put it so clearly, the northern part of the world to the southern part of the world, which is obviously mostly Africa's and other places.
and what is happening now?
Yeah, it won't be the same, right? Yeah, very good.
So it's kind of, as I said, education has always been important and it will continue to be important.
Yeah.
But we have a big problem if we examine the kind of education people are getting at this time.
Right.
Now, then we have a lot of things to say and a lot of problems to talk about.
Yeah, very, very, very good, very great gems you came up with. I mean, people have been talking about this for a long time, right? We the recent education or the current schooling, right? We need to differentiate the two. Schooling, in this case, is what we do, and education, in this case, like James Baldwin put it so clearly,
Yeah,
to know oneself and to understand the world around them, right?
exactly.
Even though throughout our conversation we'll be using them interchangeably, but I
Yeah,
just wanted our listeners to actually know that we're trying to put the two on different scales.
yeah,
Yeah, so we know that the current educational system in most countries of the world, apart from, say, the northern Scandinavian countries, um, is a type of education that hasn't changed for hundreds of years, right? Like
yeah,
while you were speaking, you made mention of how um, the recent schooling or education is made to to train people in a way that they can adhere to the society. They can obey whatever the laws and everything are set for them. Uh, the educational system we have now is from the industrial um, times, right?
yeah,
The
yes,
after the industrial revolution, everything has changed, and they needed to produce more industry workers, more
yes,
factory workers. So um, everything was standardized, right? Everything was standardized. Just recently, I did watch it a while ago. There is a TED talk by Sir Ken Robinson. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, have you watched it?
Yeah, I watch most of his TED Talks.
Yeah,
More than three times. He's
he's
funny and he's very, very educative, and I like
absolutely.
him actually.
I can listen to him for hours on end, man. He
Yes,
is so eloquent and he still makes it funny.
yes,
So yeah, he talked about how the educational system, because of the way it has been standardized, um, it doesn't help because children or children like us, when we're growing, we we don't have the same capabilities, right? Some children understand better than others, right? And but we have been tested in in a single way. So
yeah. There's conformity,
absolutely,
linearity as well.
definitely, that's where the issue lies. So say for example, you and someone in class, maybe somebody like me who would probably be good at I don't know, sports or maybe some
Art,
kind of arts, and the other person would be much suited for the sciences as we know them today, and maybe more like the technical, the math. We all be put in the same baskets and tested the same way, and
we are expected to excel
excel
at
from
the same
there.
rate or at the same level, which is problematic, I get.
And when you're not able, you the art person or you the sports person, when you're not able to succeed, you're deemed to be somebody who is
A big failure.
a failure. Exactly. So that creates a lot of problem, right? um,
Yeah, exactly.
and this problem just gets compounded when you come to the south, when you come to Africa. It gets more problematic, so to speak,
Exactly.
right? Yeah. So we, as Africans, as people who have gone through this system of education, would like to actually, I think we should talk more about our experience of what we've been through. We've experienced two different types of educational system.
Yes.
You and I'd say actually three, because our high school isn't an ordinary high school, right? The system also was different. So maybe we can actually be okay when we can be. I think we are in the right way. The word isn't coming. I think we're in the right time, or we're in the right place to talk about educational comparison. So, in this case, the education we had in Ghana and in over here, right?
Yes, actually, the first time I came here, after some few years, I realized that there are so many things that I was missing when it comes to the kind of education I was getting from my country.
Yeah.
As we stated, education is supposed to be something that will help you to identify yourself. And as an African, I don't think there is a better way of understanding yourself than learning your history, learning where you come from, what is your position in the world, and where you are supposed to be, or where you are going, or where you wanted to go, because it's finally your choice.
Yeah.
But in Africa, or where I came from, there are so many things that are missing from the curricula. And when I came here, I kind of realized like I am lost and I need to learn so many things, especially about the history of Africa and about myself. And it's actually opened my eyes when I came here. And I think the system is still in existence back home in Africa. Like, we can't deny the fact that there was some obstruction by colonialism and slavery. And when you look at the curricula now in Africa, most of African countries, it's just the extension or the relics that was left for us from the colonial powers and the legacy. And it's just the glorification of the old powers. You get to learn lots about the British, the French, the Belgium, and
why should I know? Why should I know of Sir Gordon Gordonsburg?
Yeah, Sir Alan Barnes, all of these people. I know of them, but I know little about Nkrumah and Juniors in Nyerere.
Absolutely.
And some of the Thomas Sankaras, all of these people who have played a very profound roles in the attainment of the independence of the African people. Even the Malcolm X, the Marcus Garvey, and all these Pan-Africanist leadership, we don't know anything about them.
Absolutely.
We came here, we learned what it is for you to know who you are and your identity. So we just delve into it on our own. Nobody is teaching us. And people, the viciousness of the Western education is that it makes you think like your traditional or way of doing things is not good.
It's inferior, right?
It's inferior. Even now that we are here, we kind of experience that kind of things.
Yeah, because
the inferiority of our own way of doing things.
Yeah, we've been taught to glorify everything the West in this case, our colonial powers brought. Even, there are some people who actually say, I don't know, it was very funny when I heard this for the first time. People were actually appreciative, or in this sense, they were thankful for colonialism. Can you imagine?
I also heard of it.
That's how sad our mentality and the inferiority complex has been ingrained in our bones, man. You see, you have talked a lot about our education here, and there are a lot of problems with education here in Turkey. It's not the best. It's not so different even from the African educational system,
especially for us foreigners, right?
Exactly. So when we came here, what I think, which would probably apply to you too, and most of us here, we discovered who we actually are. I think that's the difference that we're trying to put forward. We we were able to look at where we came from outside the continent, right? Because every day you meet people who ask you about who you are. So, for example, the Turkish, they know their history so well that even kids in 5th grade, so because they've been taught about the history of Turkish even from way 2,000 years ago, like the Gök Turks, and this attitude foster a certain kind of identity in a person.
Yes, and pride as well.
Exactly, which we lacked at the time. And it's not by our own doing, but it was the way we've been brought up. We haven't had a proper self-discovery in a sense.
Yes.
We've always been taught the history of other people, and sadly, when we've been taught our history, it only starts after the Portuguese came. It's so funny. It only starts. It's as if before the 15th century, nothing was happening.
Yeah.
The only history I know about Ghana and the ethnic groups, mostly before the invasion of the Europeans, is just the migration. Like this ethnic group migrated from here to here, and that's all. There's no depth into it. We don't talk about how people lived then, in what states the people were. Were they in a much better state? Were they in a much better development than they were after the invasion? You see, things like that actually is a problem, right?
Yes. Yes, you are absolutely right. Like, it's quite unfortunate that when people look at Africa, they start from slavery, the transatlantic slavery, and
not to cut you short.
Yes.
Actually, there's one quote I heard. I don't know where I saw it, probably on Twitter or something. This guy wrote the most amazing thing. He said, so, you know, in the West, in the United States, and this nowadays in Britain, they do Black History Month. I think it's in February. Have you heard of that? Black History Month.
Yes, I heard.
Yeah, so the only history they talk about is the slavery times when they came to the West. And this guy wrote, the Black history wasn't started with, or didn't start with slavery, I paraphrase. Instead, actually, slavery interrupted Black history.
Yes.
That it was so
That is perfect.
mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
It's so simple. It's what we need to know. But when somebody has been able to put it this eloquent, it makes everything change.
Yes, and it's quite profound. Like, when you read about education in Africa before the invasion or before the colonizers, it's kind of very interesting. People had their own way of teaching their society, and they have their own way of transferring knowledge from one group of people to another.
Yes.
There is this example of society, of the Bogwera and the Bojali society in, I guess it's Botswana.
Yeah.
It has been reported that they played a very important role in packaging and passing indigenous knowledges and skills, orally from generation to generation, and they did very, very well. Understand? Even though, we can say that we didn't have a very comprehensive and formula curricula, everything was happening in a kind of orally.
How we understood it, right? How we understood the world, how we interpreted.
It's not happening in that way, but people were able to transmit knowledge orally from one generation to another. And the problem with it has a lot of problem, and one of it is the loss of knowledge, and which the Western education stands on to make a case, like you don't have any written document to show that there was this kind of system for a certain way of transmitting knowledge from one person to another, especially in Africa. So they try to portray the African people as people who were sitting like idle, doing nothing, but that wasn't the case. People were seriously engaged in education in one way or the other.
And the notion that we didn't have texts, even though that's not true. Okay, for the most part, or for most, it's undeniable that we didn't necessarily have a similar texts like we have today, like writing systems. But most people, the Amharics, the ancient Egyptians, all had a way of recording, right? But we these things aren't in our hands, and because we haven't been taught to go as far as those times, we've been thinking that we actually don't have such things. So if you go as far as there was once I was listening to a South African guy. He said something that was the most amazing thing I heard. He talked about this bone called the Lebombo bone. It's made of the fibula of I don't know what, but he talked about how people then used it for measurement. You could imagine, like a ruler, like what we use in our mathematical sets to measure scale and everything. So that keeps blowing my mind. We've not heard about the naphtha plier, people who in the part of Sudan where they actually were reading the cosmos, so to speak, and what they say is it was so accurate it might well has been a modern technology.
Yes, and at that time too, you were talking about the Caesarean section.
Yes. It was this British, or I think American journalist who was in the 19th century. He wrote about how there was this, what do we call them? These juju men. So the guy was we call them local doctors or something. I think it was in the part of Uganda where he witnessed a local doctor, come and perform clean cesarean section. And he came to a conclusion that this is the result of thousands of years of practice, right? So these are things we've lost, unfortunately. We've really lost it.
Exactly. And also one of the areas that serves as an important educational vehicle for the youth in the traditional Africa was the oral literature, right?
Yes.
People were using oral literature to talk about fables, folk tales, legends, myths, and proverbs. And it was very effective, very, very effective.
And we are led to believe that it is inferior today. Right?
Yes, of course.
That's the problem.
And I heard someone quoting Hegel, who was reported to have said that Africa is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit. And that is why the colonial era should essentially be an age of enlightenment for Africans.
God.
You understand? So this also kind of supports and encourages the effort of the European and the Eurocentric approach when it comes to education.
Yeah.
So such as the class lectures and teleconferencing, which makes us undermine our own ways of transmitting knowledge. Understand? And everything they do is a kind of a vehicle through which the Western culture can be fostered or promoted in the African continent by the colonizers.
Absolutely. You've hit on a very important note there when you talked about the Eurocentric part of our educational system, and how you even mentioned Hegel. So doing some research, I came across an article. I don't remember which site, but hopefully we'll mention all these resources in our show notes. So anyone who is interested can go to our website and check them from our show notes. So the Eurocentric part of our education, this article I just mentioned, it did really well to tackle some modern and postmodern African educational problems. But there's one thing that it's mentioned that I totally disagree. It talked about how, I think the title was The Ignorance to the Core Intellectual Principles or something about the African educational system. That was one of the problems of our educational system, according to that article. It's unfortunately mentioned that the African young people should read books like Darwin, Machiavelli, and Hegel, right? Yeah, these people were thinkers. I'm not denying the fact that their work were very important, but to bring it at the forefront seemed to have a certain inferior complex. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe the writer of the article, not to blame him or her in this podcast, didn't have the knowledge of African, say, philosophy and science prior to the Darwins and Hegels and whatever. So there was actually an amazing character or an amazing historical figure I came across. He's your namesake. His name is Zera Jacob.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyone can actually search it on Google. He was such an amazing character. He is an Ethiopian philosopher, right? And he came up with works we attribute to the European Enlightenment, way before the European Enlightenment actually happened. You know, these works we attribute to Descartes, right? Even the Cogito. What's the Cogito? I think, therefore I am. Things like that. This guy had already written and talked in detail about things like this. He's an amazing person, man. I mean, obviously he's human and he has a lot of problem with this ideology and everything, but he has this work called the Hatata, Zera Jacob's Hatata. If anyone is interested, they can go and research. It's so amazing.
Yes, and there is another
like these.
A lot of them. I once also read about a certain philosopher who was in Germany. He was something, Eamon Williams, if I pronounce it correctly. He ended up coming back to Ghana. I guess he died in Ghana. He was one of the biggest philosophers, but people don't talk about that. Like, we don't know anything about them. And we are also talking about the Western education, especially the education that was brought to Africa by the colonizers. Isn't it intriguing that people were not given education to better themselves or to better their society, but rather they wanted to treat Africans who could communicate frequently in the language of the colonial powers. So
it was all about them. So they educated us to serve them.
Yes. Right. Like for example, in a school in Tanzania, for example, there was French, Latin, and other languages that was studied in preparation for you to become a priesthood.
But no Swahili.
Swahili, which is an African language, was forbidden. You can't speak that language. You
Yeah.
understand? And it shows how the education, even the ones that were imported from Europe, wasn't necessarily for the Africans to upgrade themselves, to empower themselves. It was just there to serve a certain purpose. And someone would say it was there to provide a kind of moral upright and harness Christians, Christian clerics or traders and interpreters and chiefs. You understand?
Yeah.
So it has a certain purpose, but to serve the colonizers, which is quite unfortunate. And now, when you look at the present situation or the current situation we have in Africa, you can see that because the extension of the education system we had during the colonization and slavery is still there, people are still not finding their ways. And now we question why Africa is not developing.
Yeah.
And that being said, I also want us to talk about the issue of categorizing the world into developed and undeveloped.
That's very
In terms
interesting.
of education,
Yeah.
because the developed have their standard, they've set a certain kind of standard. And for you as an undeveloped country or a nation to reach the level of a developed nation, you have to be able to reach that standard. So anything that is being done, whether it's beneficial or not, as long as it doesn't satisfy the conditions that has been set there by the
European.
by the developed countries, you can't do anything. And they've done a wonderful work by being able to make us, those of us who think that we are educated, to hate those who are not educated.
Yeah.
Even if they
Those who are
have
schooled rather than educated.
Yes.
Schooled, yeah.
You go back home, you can see that level of arrogance in us. Like even people who talk with wisdom, we see them not to have these modern certificates and fluency.
Just because they don't speak English.
Yes, just because they don't speak English or French or Portuguese.
Yeah.
So we think we have everything. We have solution to all the problems in Africa. And so we don't give them the space to also express themselves. We are the know-it-all people.
Yeah.
And it affects the development of the African people, actually.
Yeah, you've mentioned a very important thing here, talking about the division of or categorization of making it the developed and underdeveloped, educational wise, everything wise, economic wise, societal wise. They look at us as backward people, right? It hasn't stopped. You can go to other parts of Europe and find out how people, the mentality of the people, and it's so sickening sometimes. You can't really, you wouldn't know what to make of it. So you made mention of how we deny people, like you talk about people who talk with wisdom or who have a lot of things to say, but just because they're not taught in, or they don't speak in the language we deem to be the standard. Say, for example, in Ghana, when I doubt we're going to vote in a politician who is fluent in, say, one of the Ghanaian languages, but who has bright ideas and progressive and visionary ideas. I doubt we're going to vote in such people. And it will only be because they don't speak the language. And looking at things like this is very sad, because if you look at recently or the current most of the developed countries we have, they speak in their own language, right? And this is one of the things in the article I just mentioned about him talking about, or her talking about, the Eurocentric kind of educational system, talking about Hegel and others. They did really well talking about the problems of African education. And one of the points was language.
Mm.
Right? One of the points was language. So even though, say for example, we understand English in Ghana, we've been speaking English for I don't know how long, right? But I quite remember when we were in high school, JHS, right? And we were, I remember this specifically because after that, it was like a lighting bulb recently. We were taught agricultural sciences, and there were a lot of terminologies used in the agricultural science that we never really understood then. It's very sad because a simple thing like crop rotation, um, mixed farming. When I came after years, and in hindsight, I saw it was very simple. But
Yes.
then I was like, what is this? So we were just rote memorization. We just memorizing to pass the exam. If you compare that to a Turkish student or a Turkish kid here, they might just speak just one language, which is Turkish in this case, and their math, the sciences, their history, it's explained to them in Turkish. The education
Yes.
system is in Turkish, so they understand it on a native level, right? We just because we have problems of this language issue, and we can't really hold one language as our own, is one problem. I think it needs to be looked up again.
That being said, on the same point you are making, which is very important, I'm kind of interested in this question. Like, there has been debate amongst various intellectuals on the issue of the language we use in Africa.
Yeah.
Like, people learn in English and French and Portuguese and to some extent Arabic.
Yeah.
There are some who are calling for
the reform.
Educations, to be taught in an African language to facilitate better understanding and creativity. You know, it's easy for you to be creative if you are able to understand what you are studying.
Yeah.
It's easy for you to add something to the already existing inventions if you are able to understand. And as you said, most of us mixed a lot of things because we are not so equipped with the English language and we don't understand some of the nuances in the language. So what do you think we can do to tackle this? Do we need a thorough changing of the linguistic or the lexicon, if I can say, in the way we teach people? Because, in Africa, we have more than 2,000 languages.
Yeah.
And every country at least has more than like 100 language, or to be polite, I think maybe active 50 language that are very, very active.
Yeah.
So how can we select one language as a national language? And to some extent, that was the main reason why I think personally, or I believe, they chose this French and English, even though there are some external forces or external powers that were forcing them to use the English language or the French or the Portuguese or Arabic as the medium of teaching. Do you think changing the language, or can we change the
existing system of the language?
System of the medium of teaching to a kind of local language to facilitate? And how can we bring 2, 3, 5, 10 different ethnic groups together to understand or to accept, to learn or to educate themselves in a very common language?
Yeah, so me not being an expert in any kind of educational system, or me not being a historian of any kind, right? I don't think I have the expertise. But
Yes.
with that being said, on my personal viewpoint, I honestly believe it's going to be very, very difficult.
Extremely
Because
difficult, right?
you're talking about 100 years of drilling of a particular language, 100 years of doing something or doing things in a particular way. If
And also feeding the division between these ethnic groups and languages,
yes,
so that they can
yes,
never come together.
exactly. So if there is to be any kind of, I don't know, any kind of reform, medium-wise, educational or language-wise, it has to be very slow. It has to be gradual. We have to change the mindset of people. We have to bring our people together. Most importantly, that is what we need to do first, in my opinion. We will have an expert on these matters, hopefully, come on this podcast and give us more insights on what you just said. But first, we need to do that. That is one thing. Second, we don't need to automatically or definitely change the medium of teaching. So even with that medium, for example, Ghana in English, even with that, we can customize it to be a more Ghanaian way. Let me show you, let me give you a trivial example. Very, very simple. So when we were kids, we were taught similes or similarities or something. I don't really remember. It was in English language. We talked about, for example, as angry as a lion, right?
Mm.
There was one which always surprises me, or when I think about it, it's funny. We say as white as snow.
Snow. Yes.
Like, oh, so you're teaching a Ghanaian kid, right? As white as snow. In the whole of Africa, in the whole of Ghana, there isn't something white that you can compare with.
Yeah.
How would I, a Ghanaian child, know what snow is?
Yes.
How would a Ghanaian child like me know as white as snow? The only thing that is going to happen is I'm going to memorize it.
I don't know
I
what
can't
snow is.
contextualize it.
I've never seen a snow before.
I've never seen a snow before. Right?
Yeah.
So this, you can say as white as cotton. Cotton is white.
Yeah.
I can touch cotton. I can know, right? But, so it's a very funny, it seems trivial, but there are more advanced way of comparing these or talking about these. So things like that, we need to change. We need to customize it accordingly to what we know, what we can touch, textualize, and contextualize, right?
Yes.
One
Exactly.
other thing I would like to mention pertaining to this matter is it's not that we haven't had an educational system that was used, that the medium was a foreign language before. We had one of the first universities in Timbuktu, Mali.
Yes.
We still have existing manuscripts in Mali. If you go there, you can find them. People from other places of the world came to Mali, Timbuktu, that time, to seek knowledge, to seek education, right? And the medium of study in that university, number one, was Arabic, right? That's a foreign language. That's a language we are unfamiliar with. That's a Middle Eastern language. But there are manuscripts right now which are written in Wolof. You see books of, there's this guy Ahmed Baba, I think, his father, Ahmed Ibn Akid, Timbuktu. He wrote the Book of Logic. It's even still used in part of Northern Africa, like.
But it's in the local dialect, right?
It's in Arabic. It's in local dialect, like I just mentioned, Wolof, their poetry written in Fulbe, right? Not every person in the Malian Empire then spoke Arabic or Fulbe or Wolof, but they were able to bring it so that people could actually understand, could relate. So things as advanced as logic, you can imagine, were written in Fulbe, whatever language was spoken in the Songhais empire. So we can go back then, at least, which is not very far, like what? I'm talking in the 13th century or even 12th century. And take inspiration from then. We can go back then. It's something doable, but it's unfortunate that we don't have these. So to me, these are steps towards an educational reform in an African way.
Yeah, when you talk, what I hear is, I don't know if I've heard it right, is that we can't abandon the Western education totally, but we can also complement it with what we used to know.
That is my view.
Like just the Japanese, to my understanding, did at a certain point. They sent their people to the Western world. Yeah, they sent their people to the Western world. They learn. So when they came back, they kind of look at everything they studied, and anything that does not go in line with their culture norms, morals, they kind of adjust it, complement it with their local way of doing things. But unfortunately for Africans, we were encouraged to abandon our own way of doing things, to see it as inferior, as we said before. So what can you say, what do you have to say when it comes to the issue of globalization and the imposition it brings when it comes to education? You know, we are a globalized world, and you talked about the industrialization. So if the world is industrializing, and Africa has always been a source of both human resources and the mineral resources that is on the continent, do you think these, with the way the world is going, would allow the African to readjust themselves? Because you are needed, your resources are needed, your human manpower is needed. So there is also a certain kind of concerted effort that are being put in place to make sure that there is no way Africans can shape their own educational system or to have their own way, which I have to say this, the globalization has a very immense effect on almost every country on the continent.
Yes.
So for you to say, I'm not going to go with it, I'm going to be isolated, will be extremely difficult.
And it will be stupid.
And you will starve to death, right?
Yeah, so, absolutely.
What do you think? Like, do Africans or African countries have the space to adjust their system, even though they are not giving up the Western education thoroughly, but they can go back, as you said, or revisit what we used to have, complement it with the Western education, and have our own way of dealing with things?
Yeah. Okay, so if I understood you clearly, you're trying to you're asking me if we can actually keep up with the globalization and the industrialization, or maybe in this case, technological advancement we're having, while us trying to reform our educational system. Wouldn't it be detrimental to our development? Right. Okay. So we don't have to isolate ourselves. In my opinion, we shouldn't. I don't advise. I don't think it's even sensible. It's nonsensical in so many ways. We need to get that balance. We need to gradually, as we've already mentioned so many times, change our system. We can look at other countries which are not the West. The world is not made up of the West. Otherwise, we won't call it the West, right?
Yes.
Which means there's North, there's South. All right. If we go towards the east, what we realize is they've also had their own problems. You made mention of the Japanese, the Chinese. They're not learning in in English or in French or in any other language. I don't know any, maybe outside of India, maybe only India has an English, and we know the history of India is very similar to Africans, right? If you go to Taiwan, for example, when did Taiwan become a superpower in factory, in industry, in manufacturing? When? Very just recent. And Taiwanese do not speak English, nor do they speak French. But if you want better factories of manufacturing, say, simple things like even this recent pandemic issue has brought forward how advanced the Taiwanese have been, right? They have been taught in their own language. I think they speak Chinese, or as specific dialect of Taiwanese Chinese, or maybe there's Taiwanese. I don't have ignorance of their language. But what I want to say is, we don't have to isolate ourselves. There are blueprints of how people, even the USSR, after it was divided, right? It has blueprints for us to follow, how they caught up to the world. Countries like Kazakhstan, even though they're not the best example, but they've been taught in Russian. But what I'm trying to say is, even though they've been taught in Russian, they also have the Kazakh language, and it complements each other in a way, right? If you go as far as Indonesia, you and I would know how smart the Indonesians are, right? In our schools, we know them, but they weren't taught in English, even though they learned English. They were taught in Indonesian, but they did math in Indonesian, right? It's something we don't have to isolate ourselves, but we have to compromise. We have to find a way to make it work, which if the whole Africa can't come together to do such a thing, or a whole country in Africa can't come together to do such a thing, then I don't know what we're doing, what kind of education we are having. We can change it. We can have Ghanaian languages implemented slowly, make it a more understandable language. We don't need to invent a writing system. That's not what we're talking about.
I think, and I guess we are still learning the various Ghanaian language and various regions in the country. It's just
not
like
enough.
the technical and the scientific words needed to enable the teaching of scientific subjects and other things that are missing. But that can also be created because people used these scientific names previously. They didn't know anything called English, and they were using medicines. They were trying to find all these kind of things. We come to the role that the governments and citizenry can play towards towards educating the African people. But shortly, do you think that the kind of scholarship that African youths, because we know the Africans that excel in schools receive scholarship to go and study in Europe, abroad, and America, which further distance them from the African cultures. Do you think that is also detrimental to the African development or the education of the African people?
Theoretically,
and we are also part of this, I guess.
Yes, so I guess
keep that in mind.
Absolutely. So theoretically, in theory, it should work, because you just gave an example, a clear example of the Japanese.
Yes.
After the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? They went out to seek knowledge from the West, and they came back. That is the key word.
But we don't have that, right?
Exactly. They came back. Like in the previous episode, I mentioned something very similar. I said I didn't have a specific data to prove, but I think the most successful Africans who have studied outside, I think majority of us do not come back to Africa. That scholarship going abroad is nothing bad. It should be encouraged in certain contexts. So we have to first, most importantly, know why we're going. I think there has to be like a program for specific scholarship students who are going to go. Like there has to be a government body, not the embassies. The embassy shouldn't do this. They can just say, this is a government body that focuses on Ghanaians who study abroad, Ghanaians who study in Turkey. This is about
or Nigerians, or Tanzanians, or Kenyans, or Egyptians.
Exactly. I think if there is a certain body like this that follows up. So, for example, every year a lot of students come to Turkey. The Turkish scholarship awards, I don't know how many Ghanaians, I don't know, maybe 30 Ghanaians or probably less or more. If everything is set, all is said and done, that committee can sit these people down, get their contacts, give them the support, everything they need in Ghana, then export them to Turkey, right? Before they come, they need to be taught, to be spoken to be given the support. They need to let them know that, hey, look, we're sending you here. We are behind you. Whatever you need, if it's material, if it's material support, social support, whatever, we'll try to, as much as we can, support you in that sense, right? And one more thing we need to do is when we're exporting such people to the foreign countries, we have to be careful what we're exporting them to do, right? So the Turkish have this problem they keep talking about, saying that after a certain time in the Turkish history, they were sent to West, and then instead of them coming back with the technology and everything, they came back with the social norms of the West, and they're still having the implications of those. Having said that, coming back to us, when say you're sending 20 people to Turkey, make sure you know what they're going to study.
It comes back to the survivor and the needs.
Exactly, and the needs. Make sure, so for example, not to say anything bad about our African brothers and sisters, but I see African brothers and sisters, when you ask them what they're studying, they say, I am studying microbiology, or maybe space engineering, something like that. It's good. It's really good. You can study whatever you want. But which African country would you say in 4 or 5 years, that is when you're graduating, if you're going to study 4 or 5, even 10 years, would need a space in? Anything can change. But which African country, or would you say
But
Ghana?
we have to be realistic, right?
We have to be realistic, exactly. Would we look for space engineers? No.
So when you hear those kind of things, the courses that are stated by Africans here, it's kind of, you can see the stamp like, this guy is not going back to Africa.
Exactly. That is my point. So when somebody studies microgenetics or some other fancy courses, how would you expect this person to go back to Ghana? If I studied aerospace engineering or genetics or whatever, I can't, because the platform in Ghana is not made for me now.
There's no environment to accommodate.
Exactly.
And during we saw that during this the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, it exposes everybody. We don't even have the Center for Disease Control.
Exactly.
It was just recently people were rushing to create some. So imagine someone who has invested years in studying these things about pandemics and viruses,
Yeah, exactly.
where would he? Definitely, the person is not going back. And on that note, I said there are two people when you talk about education, they come to my mind. I talk about James Baldwin.
Mm-hmm.
And now another one is the most very revered, respected historian, John Henry Clark, African historian.
Okay.
He said, like, powerful people cannot afford to educate the people they oppress.
No.
Because once you are truly educated, you will not ask for power, you will take it.
Yeah.
So do you think, as you said, like, people should be guided when they are coming outside of Africa as to what they are going to stay? They should be sent according to the needs of the continent. Do you think there is any government who want to educate his citizens, knowing that these people might turn up and fight against me when I'm doing wrong?
Yeah. Even so, all right. Okay. So, okay, you're done with the question?
Yes, you can come in.
Okay. So, it's hard to say. So even the fact of saying the government should, I'm not saying the government should dictate what people are going to study, but our people, the people themselves, should be more, should know what's needed by the country, or what needed of the country, of themselves, of what they're going to provide to the country. But is there a government who would like to educate the people properly so that they will come back? Evidently, no. I don't think there's I don't think there's a government in the world, not only Africa, few countries are exception, that there's freedom of there's creative freedom to educating the masses, because African leaders, not to bash all of them, are very power hungry, right? They won't allow us to go out to express ourselves in a way we can come back and actually how to say, challenge their power in any way,
or the existing system.
Yeah, exactly, because they're so power hungry that if anybody is going to challenge that status quo, they can do anything to the person. So I was speaking with our consulate, and he was talking to me about how when he was this is simple, but he said when he was working in one of the government buildings, they were used to the old system of getting things done. They came in the morning, and then it was paperwork, right? Calculation and documents and stuff. And they worked up to, say, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. And they sometimes do not get simple things done. So when he came, he studied, he knows how to use a computer. He is a computer literate. So that same work they use hours on end to do, he finishes it at around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and they have nothing else to do.
You're just sitting there.
And because he finishes it that early and he does it immaculately, they started to hate him. They were like, you know how
it's been too known.
Yes, too known, exactly. It's like, I fear Unkola, right? The tree. Like he was saying, now children, they think they know stuff, but he's being effective. That is what we need. So he told me that was the reason why he fought to get the position as a consulate or an assistant in the embassy here. You can imagine.
Wow.
He's gone, and then they're back to square one again.
Yes.
You see.
So does this call for, because we know the governments, of course,
Yeah.
They won't absolutely want to educate their people because it's a kind of disaster to them. Some countries are kind of source of pride for people. And we saw it across the world. People can stand against their leaders. So does this cause for another alternative when it comes to the government or the normal education we get? For instance, in Turkey here, as you might know, they have alternative way of teaching people what they think is necessary. Like during the weekends, you have organizations who are teaching people about history, about sociology, psychology, and all these things. So people learn a lot outside school, which is more beneficial to them than what they learn in school. But Africa, when you look at most African countries, we don't have this alternative. There's always school, and the education in the school is meant that you end up depending on the government who has the right to employ you, and they don't have the avenue and the revenue to create employment. So the level of unemployment is getting high, and people who are educated with degrees can afford to spend a lot of money just to cross the Mediterranean Sea, just to go to Europe for greener pastures. So how can we get this alternative education? Where can we get it very quickly?
All right. So, like you said, here in Turkey, these things they're not necessarily done by the government, but the government allows it. We can have similar organizations. We can have similar branches where people can actually go and seek not necessarily the knowledge we get in school, but another type of perspective or another lens of looking at how education could work. So it's because of how we've been trained. Because of how we've been trained, we can't really see that yet. Because I do remember when we were kids, like you said, we've been brought up to serve the government, which is not that bad, but it has so many layers.
If we have the avenue to accommodate that number of people, right?
Exactly. So when we were kids, what our families told us were, "Hey, look, go to school, do a good job, and come get a work in the government, get a job in the government, and bring us some of the government money."
Yes.
You see, that mentality is so sad. I don't blame those people, because that is what we think education is. Get a job and bring us that government money. Whose government money? If they knew the government money was their money, they wouldn't speak like this.
Exactly.
You see, so alternatives could be approached. We can have people come together. Our president, our leaders know of such system of education. We can tailor our educational system. It doesn't always have to be the scientific kind or the contemporary or the conventional type of education we know, right? So there was this podcast I was listening to. And it was an interview with this girl. She was studying in a school. It's Philip something School of Entrepreneurship. It's like they basically teach you math in an entrepreneurial way, right? Things like this could be inculcated, could be brought about, and a lot of things. If we're here to speak about the problems of African education or Ghanaian or whatever, we can take months, hours, and we still wouldn't be able to do justice to the problems.
Okay, in 1 minute, what do you think is the role of the people, the citizens? What role can they play to kind of change the trajectory of the education system or education system we have?
I think it's going to change, but it's going to take a lot of efforts, and it's not to be left for only the people in the countries. Now there's the diaspora, there's the acknowledgement of Africans who are outside Africa coming back. So
Yeah,
if we're
Africans in
able
the
to,
diaspora.
in the diaspora, if we're able to work together, right, with the knowledge Africans in Africa have and the knowledge the diasporians have, and bring them together and form or create a certain type of educational system or whatever system we think would be beneficial, that is the way forward. We can't just leave it for people back in Africa.
Okay, now let me put you on the spot. Now let's say you slept.
Yeah.
Tomorrow you woke up.
Mm-hmm.
You are the president of one of the African countries. Let's say Ghana.
Yeah.
What is the one thing that you're going to do which you think would set the ball or the stone or the ball or whatever rolling? One thing. And why do you think? Very quick.
Interesting. I'll ask you that same question, by the way.
No, you are the one on the spot, so you should answer that question.
It's a co-hosting, so a co-host has to do half of the work, right? So very interesting.
Yes.
I have thought of it, but because it's on the spot, I think the system of standardized education would have to change. We have to change our view on BEC, for example, WASI, the way students are being brought up to just go to these exams. We have to bring that kind of different organization which are approved by the government in a way, right? To have the power, in a sense, to be able to bring up these students. Entrepreneurship schools, training colleges, which gratefully it's being applied in Ghana now. Things we need to change, and we need to teach our people our history.
Yes.
History we can be proud of.
Thank you very much for answering the question for me too.
No.
I was going to say that, so
yes.
you've already answered it for me. So.
No, you have to say something. What do you think? The same question applies to you.
Yes, I will make African history compulsory. If you don't pass it, you won't go anywhere.
So we're coming back to the standardization thing. I know, just kidding.
Yeah, standardizing the African history. Yes,
well, I understand the problem. Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
I don't think if we're able to handle or deal with the issue of education very well, but I guess we're able to just say our minds, and our listeners will have a lot to say or better things to say than what we say today. So, Abdulhafiz, what do you have to tell them?
What I would like to say to our listeners is they should keep on supporting us. If anybody has a view, an opinion, they can write to us on our social media, and hopefully we can look at them and we can see how more we can progress from where we are, because we're looking to have progress and development in Africa. And hopefully we can do it together as a whole and as a diaspora.
And the platform is for all of us, so people should not hesitate when they have anything to say to us or to criticize us as well.
We're looking. We're actually looking
to
for
improve
criticism.
ourselves. Right? Yes.
Yeah, you can't improve yourself without criticism. Yes. So,
thank you very much for listening to us, and we hope to see you in our next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the African Experience Podcast. For show notes, visit us on www.theaexppodcast.com and follow us on social media at the AEXP Podcast.